Okay, so you know that feeling, right? Like you're stuck in traffic, maybe running a little late, and you kind of just look up at the sky and you get that thought, like, hey, where's my flying car?
Yeah,
It's this thing we've been promised for so long, this like futuristic vision.
right.
It's become kind of a joke almost.
It has, and that desire for personal flight has been around for quite a while, and it's a great question. It's a question that kind of launches us into this deep dive today
Exactly.
into the world of flying cars and roadable aircraft.
Yeah, and we've got a really fascinating history laid out in front of us today.
We do.
Our sources go all the way back to the early 1900s.
The early days.
And our goal is to give you a clear picture, like a concise but thorough look at how this whole idea of a flying car
Yeah,
has evolved over time. What are the challenges and where do things stand right now?
absolutely. I think what you'll find really interesting is just how many different prototypes and concepts have come up over the last 100 years.
Right. Even in those early days, people were trying all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They were coming at it from completely different angles.
So let's start at the very beginning,
Okay.
way back in 1901.
Wow.
There's a mention of Gustav Whitehead, a German immigrant who was working here in the U.S.
Okay.
Now, he claimed to have flown a powered aircraft that could also be driven on the road.
Huh. Interesting.
This was in Connecticut. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate among historians about whether this flight actually happened the way he said it did.
So right off the bat, we run into this problem of, what even counts as a flying car?
Right. Like,
What is flight?
how do you even define
Right.
success in these early
Yeah.
attempts?
And verifying these early claims is really difficult.
Okay, so let's jump ahead a few years to 1917.
Okay.
And we've got Glenn Curtiss, a pretty big name in early aviation. He
Absolutely.
developed something called the autoplane.
Okay.
Now, this thing used a pusher propeller, which means the propeller was at the back of the aircraft pushing it forward. It also had these removable flight surfaces, including this big triplane wing,
Wow.
like 3 wings stacked on top of each other.
So they were already thinking about the idea of making it compact.
Yeah, like making it easy to switch between road and air.
Yeah, and that's pretty forward thinking for the time.
It was, but there was a catch.
Okay.
It could only really do short hops.
Oh,
It couldn't achieve sustained flight.
interesting.
Still, though, the idea of removable wings, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it shows they were already thinking about how to make a vehicle that could function in both environments.
Okay, then there's this pretty dramatic story from 1935.
Oh,
This involves a guy named Konstantinos Vlachos and his invention, which he called a triphibian vehicle.
trifibian, so like land, air, and water.
Exactly. He was going for it all.
Ambitious.
Now, this thing had a circular wing, very unusual design.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Yeah, it's pretty unique.
Okay.
But unfortunately, during a public demonstration at Washington, D.C., the engine exploded. Yeah, Blachos was seriously injured. And get this, that the whole thing was caught on newsreel footage.
Oh, wow.
So it kind of became this infamous example of how dangerous these early flying car experiments could be.
Yeah, a stark reminder of the risks involved.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to something a little more successful.
Okay.
In 1936, the Autogyro Company of America came up with the AC-35.
Okay.
Now, this was a rotable autogyro, which means it used a rotor for lift, like a helicopter. But the rotor was not powered by the engine.
Oh,
It was free spinning, so it got its lift from the forward motion of the vehicle.
interesting. So a bit like a windmill almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And this AC-35, it actually flew successfully. They tested it in the air, and then they drove it right up to the Commerce Building in D.C.
Wow.
and presented it to the head of the aeronautics branch.
So it got official approval.
It did, but here's the thing. It never went into production.
Oh, really? Why not?
It's a good question.
Okay.
It had the official thumbs up, but for some reason, it just never made that leap from prototype to actual product.
Yeah, you'd think with that kind of endorsement, it would have taken off.
You would, but it seems like there were other factors at play.
Right, things like cost and demand. Maybe the market just wasn't ready.
Yeah, that's probably a big part of it.
Okay, so even with a successful design,
Yeah.
it wasn't a guaranteed success story.
Not at all.
Hmm.
All right, now we come to Waldo Waterman and his Aerobile from 1937.
The Aerobile.
Yeah. This one is considered the first fixed-wing rotable aircraft to actually fly.
Okay, so fixed wing meaning it had traditional airplane-like wings.
Exactly. And Waterman, He had some experience working with Glenn Curtiss on amphibious aircraft.
So he knew a thing or two about combining different modes of transportation.
Exactly. So the Aerobile used a Studebaker engine for both road and air travel.
Huh, a Studebaker engine.
Yeah, pretty cool, right?
That is interesting. I wonder how they managed that.
And it had a wingspan of 38 feet.
That's pretty big.
It could fly at 112 miles per hour
Wow.
and drive at 56.
Not too shabby.
No, not bad at all.
Okay, so this Aerobile really seems like a significant step forward.
It shows that a fixed wing design could actually work.
Yeah, it moves beyond just those short hops we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. All right, one more early attempt worth mentioning.
Okay.
The Hafner Rota-Buggy from 1942.
The Rota-Buggy, what a name.
I know, right? This one was developed by the British Army,
Okay.
and it was an autogyro again.
Ah, so that free-spinning rotor design?
Yeah, but this one was designed to be airdropped.
They're dropped.
Yeah, the idea was to deliver off-road vehicles to the battlefield.
Huh, like a flying Jeep carrier.
Pretty much. And it could reach a speed of 70 miles per hour in the air.
Not bad, but I guess if they could just drop the Jeep directly.
Exactly. They developed gliders that could carry entire vehicles.
So the Rota-Buggy became obsolete.
Pretty much, it's a good example of how sometimes a better solution comes along and makes a previous invention kind of redundant.
Right. It's all about finding the most practical option.
Right, so we've seen all these early attempts, some more successful than others.
Yeah, a lot of experimentation going on.
Now let's move into the late 20th century.
Okay, so what's happening in this era?
Well, there are even more prototypes popping up, but still no commercially successful flying cars.
So the dream is still alive, but the reality is proving elusive.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're getting closer, but something's still missing.
What do you think is holding them back?
Well, technology is definitely advancing, but it seems like the fundamental challenges,
Yeah.
things like making them safe and reliable, making them easy to use, and making them affordable,
Right.
those challenges are still there.
Okay, so even though we're seeing more sophisticated designs,
Yeah,
those core problems are preventing mass adoption.
exactly. One example of this is the Convair car.
The Convair car.
Yeah, it was a flying car design from the late 1940s,
Yeah?
and it actually achieved flight.
Huh, so it worked.
It did, but it was bulky and expensive,
Okay.
and most people had never even heard of it.
So not exactly a household name?
Nope, not even close.
All right, so a successful flight doesn't necessarily equal success in the market.
Not at all. All right, now let's talk about the Taylor Aerocar.
The Aero car.
Yeah, this one was from 1949, and it's actually considered one of the more successful flying car designs.
Really?
Yeah, they built several of them.
Huh.
And amazingly, one is still flying today.
Wow, that's impressive.
It was designed by a guy named Molt Taylor, and it featured folding wings.
Folding wings, we've seen that a few times now.
It's a common theme, right? It makes sense, though. You got to make it compact for the road.
Big sense, yeah.
And get this, the Aerocar even got a mention in a Chuck Berry song, You Can't Catch Me.
Oh, wow, so it was kind of making its way into pop culture.
It was. And in 1956, the Civil Aviation Authority actually approved it for mass production.
So they were ready to go.
They even came out with an improved version in 1989.
But it still didn't really take off commercially, did it?
Nope, they only ever built 6 Aerocars.
6, so close, but so far.
It's a classic example of how regulatory approval doesn't guarantee success.
Yeah, you got to have that market demand as well.
Absolutely. Okay, another interesting design from this era.
Okay.
The Fulton FA-2 Amphibian.
The Amphibian.
Yeah, this one was built in 1946, and it was an aluminum-bodied car with detachable fabric wings.
Detachable wings, that's a new one.
Yeah, it's a pretty clever idea. You could basically unbolt the wings and leave them at the airfield.
So it was a true dual-purpose vehicle.
Exactly. And get this, even Charles Lindbergh flew in it.
Wow, Lindbergh himself.
Yeah, back in 1950.
So it had some serious credibility.
It did, but despite that, it was not a commercial success.
What went wrong this time?
Well, it seems like the main issue was the cost of obtaining airworthiness certification.
Those regulatory hurdles again.
Yeah, they can be a real killer, especially for a niche product like this.
Makes sense. I mean, it's got to meet all those safety standards for both road and air travel.
Exactly, and that can get very expensive.
Yeah, so even with Lindbergh's endorsement, the Amphibian couldn't overcome those economic challenges.
Nope, it's now on display at the Smithsonian, though.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a testament to its ingenuity, even if it wasn't a commercial success.
Right. A fascinating piece of history.
Right. Now, for a story that's a bit more somber,
Okay.
Henry Smolinski and his Mazar from 1973.
The Mizar.
Yeah, this one was a bit of a Frankenstein's monster.
Okay.
Smolinski took a Cessna Skymaster airplane and a Ford Pinto car.
Wait, he combined a plane and a car?
He basically attached the rear section of the Cessna to the Pinto.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It was, and unfortunately it didn't end well.
What happened?
Well, during a test flight, the vehicle disintegrated in midair.
Oh, no.
Yeah, both Smolinski and the pilot were killed.
That's terrible.
It was a real tragedy and highlighted the dangers of trying to combine complex systems like this.
Yeah, it seems like you can't just slap wings on a car and hope for the best.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
takes a lot more than that.
You need a truly integrated design.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. The British Army also explored the flying car concept.
Really?
Yeah, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, they had a project called Project Prodigal.
Project Prodigal.
Yeah, and the goal was to create a jumping Jeep.
A jumping Jeep. Like, it could jump over obstacles.
Well, the idea was to give it some limited airborne capability so it could overcome terrain challenges on the battlefield.
Huh. So it was more about enhanced mobility rather than full-blown flight.
Exactly, and several well-known British aircraft companies were involved in the project.
So it was taken seriously.
It was, but ultimately it didn't lead to any production vehicles.
Interesting, but it shows that the military was still intrigued by this concept.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about Muller.
Muller, I've heard that name.
Yeah, they're pretty famous in the flying car world.
Okay.
They started developing VTL aircraft back in the late 1960s.
VTL, well, it's vertical takeoff and landing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And their designs were pretty futuristic. They really captured the public imagination.
So they were getting people excited about flying cars.
Yeah, they were. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
None of their vehicles ever actually achieved sustained free flight out of ground effect.
Out of ground effect, what does that mean?
So when an aircraft is very close to the ground, it experiences this phenomenon called ground effect,
Okay.
which basically means it gets extra lift and reduced drag because of the way the air interacts with the ground.
Huh. So it's easier to fly when you're close to the ground.
Exactly. And the Muller vehicles, they could kind of hover and move around a bit in ground effect,
Okay.
but they couldn't really take off and fly properly.
So they were kind of stuck in that low altitude zone.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's interesting. So even with all the hype and the futuristic designs,
Yeah.
they couldn't quite crack that free flight challenge.
Nope. And the company has been dormant since 2015.
Huh. So they're not actively developing anymore.
Not at the moment, anyway.
Okay, so another example of a company that showed promise but ultimately couldn't deliver on the full vision of a flying car.
Exactly. All right, one last design from the late 20th century,
Okay.
Fred Barker's Sky Commuter.
The Sky Commuter.
Yeah, this one was from the mid-1980s.
Okay.
And it was a small VTL aircraft that used ducted fans for lift.
Ducted fans. So those are like enclosed propellers, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it was made from composite materials, which was pretty advanced for the time.
So they were pushing the boundaries in terms of materials and design?
They were. And get this, the remaining prototype was actually sold on eBay in 2008.
On eBay. Wow, that's a strange end for a flying car prototype.
It is, but it kind of shows how these smaller projects sometimes fall by the wayside.
Yeah, the economics of it all, I guess.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the early and late 20th century.
A lot of interesting designs along the way.
Now let's jump into the 21st century.
Okay, so what's happening in the modern era?
Well, we're seeing a real resurgence of interest in flying cars.
Really? Why is that?
Well, for one thing, technology has advanced significantly.
Makes sense.
We've got lighter, stronger materials,
Yeah.
more sophisticated electronics,
Uh-huh.
and the potential for autonomous systems is growing rapidly.
Right, so the tools are there now to potentially make this a reality?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Plus, there's growing concern about traffic congestion and environmental impact.
Okay, so people are looking for alternative modes of transportation.
Exactly.
So the need and the technology are kind of converging.
Yeah, it's like all the pieces are starting to fall into place.
Okay, so what are some of the key developments in the 21st century?
Well, one early effort worth mentioning is DARPA's Transformer program.
DARPA, that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Exactly. So they launched this program in 2009.
Okay.
And the goal was to develop a 4-person VTOL roadable aircraft.
Ambitious.
They wanted it to have a range of at least 250 miles.
Wow, that's a decent range.
It is, and they put a lot of money into it.
How much?
$65 million.
Wow, that's a serious investment.
It was. But ultimately, the program was canceled in 2013.
Oh, really? Why?
Well, it seems like they ran into a lot of technical challenges.
Yeah, imagine it's not easy to create a vehicle that can do all of that.
Not at all. But it shows that even with a lot of resources,
Yeah.
This stuff is really difficult.
Okay, so a government-backed program with serious funding still couldn't crack it.
Not quite.
Oh.
Okay, now let's talk about something a little more off the wall.
Okay.
The Parajet Skycar.
The Parajet Skycar.
Yeah, this one's pretty wild.
What's so special about it?
It's basically a dune buggy with a paramotor attached to it.
A paramotor, so like a big fan and a parachute.
Pretty much.
Huh.
And it actually works. It can drive on the ground and fly in the air.
Really? How fast?
It can reach speeds of around 80 to 112 miles per hour, both on the ground and in the air.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
It is. And in 2009, they did this crazy stunt where they drove and flew it all the way from London to Timbuktu.
Wow, that's a long way.
It is.
So they proved it's capable of long distances.
Yeah, and they even had to deal with different terrains and weather conditions.
So it's not just a fair weather vehicle?
Not at all.
Right.
Another design that takes a more specialized approach.
Okay.
The Maverick Flying Dune Buggy.
Another dune buggy.
Yeah, this one's a bit different, though.
Okay.
It was developed by the Indigenous Peoples Technology and Education Center of Florida.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's specifically designed for off-road use.
Okay.
It has a deployable parachute and a pusher propeller.
So it's kind of like a powered paraglider on wheels?
Yeah, exactly. And the idea is to use it to serve remote communities and for things like pipeline inspection.
Huh. So it's about accessing hard-to-reach places.
Precisely.
Okay. So flying car designed for a very specific purpose.
Exactly. All right. Now for something a bit more conventional.
Okay.
The plane-driven PD-1 Roadable Glass Star.
The Roadable Glass Star.
Yeah, this one is basically a modified Glass Star aircraft, which is a popular kit-built airplane.
Okay.
And they've added a detachable engine pod for road propulsion, and they've made the wings foldable.
So it's like a regular airplane that they've made roadworthy.
Pretty much. It's a clever way to leverage an existing aircraft design.
Yeah, it seems like it would simplify things in terms of certification.
It could.
Okay, so another example of adapting an airplane for dual use.
Exactly. All right, then we've got the Super Sky Cycle.
The Super Sky Cycle.
Yeah, this one's pretty unique.
What is it?
It's an American home-built roadable gyroplane.
A gyroplane, so another one with a free spinning rotor.
Yep.
Okay.
And get this, it's registered as a motorcycle.
A motorcycle. Wow, that's blurring the line.
It shows how there's a lot of creativity and experimentation happening in this space.
Yeah, people are really pushing the boundaries of what a flying car can be.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about Aeromobile.
Aeromobile, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're a Slovakian company.
Okay.
And they've been developing flying car prototypes for a while now.
What are their designs like?
Well, they typically feature folding wings,
Okay.
and they use a Rotax 912 engine, which is a popular aircraft engine.
Okay.
They're aiming for speeds of around 124 miles per hour
Not bad.
and a range of several hundred miles.
So they're going for a more practical everyday vehicle.
Yeah, that seems to be their goal.
Okay.
And they actually achieved Slovak ultralight certification back in 2016.
So they're making progress on the regulatory front.
Their vision seems to be a true flying roadster, something that's sleek and stylish and fun to drive.
Interesting. So a flying car with a bit of a luxury feel.
Exactly. All right. Now, for another Slovakian company,
Okay.
Klein Vision.
Klein Vision.
Yeah, they've developed a prototype called the Air Car.
The Air Car. I think I've seen pictures of this one.
It's pretty distinctive. It looks like a sports car with wings that fold out.
Yeah, I remember that.
And in June 2021, it achieved a pretty significant milestone.
What was that?
It successfully completed a 35-minute flight between two airports.
Wow. So it actually flew from one airport to another?
It transitioned from road mode to air mode and back again.
That's impressive.
It is. And here's the even bigger news.
Yeah.
In January 2022, it received aircraft type certification.
So it's officially recognized as a safe and airworthy aircraft.
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
huge step forward for the whole flying car industry.
It is. It shows that these vehicles can meet the rigorous standards of aviation authorities.
Absolutely are now for another company that's been in the game for a while.
Okay.
Terrafugia.
Terrafugia. I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're an American company.
Okay.
And they've been working on a flying car called the Transition.
The Transition.
Yeah, it's designed as a personal air vehicle, or PAV.
PAV.
Yeah, it's basically a small two-seater aircraft with folding wings.
Okay.
It can drive on its front wheels, and the wings deploy in about 30 seconds.
Huh. That's pretty quick.
It's got a range of 500 miles.
Wow, that's a decent range.
Yeah, and it uses a Rotax engine that runs on premium unleaded gasoline.
So it's using readily available fuel.
Exactly. And get
Okay.
this, the Transition actually received FAA approval back in June 2010.
Wow, so they were ahead of the curve in terms of regulation.
They were. And they even showcased a prototype at the Oshkosh Air Show in 2008.
Oshkosh, that's like the biggest air show in the world.
It is. It's a big deal, and the transition had its first flight in 2009.
So they were making real progress.
They were, but despite all that, it never really took off commercially.
Huh, so what happened?
Well, it seems like it came down to a few things.
Okay.
The price was pretty high.
Yeah, these things aren't cheap.
Nope. And the infrastructure wasn't really there.
What do you mean by infrastructure?
Well, to use a flying car effectively, you need places to take off and land.
Right, like small airports or vertiports.
Exactly. And those are still pretty limited.
So even if you could afford a flying car, you wouldn't necessarily have anywhere convenient to use it.
Exactly. All right, now let's talk about a company that actually claims to have a flying car in production.
Really?
Yeah, Pelvi, a Dutch company.
Pelvi Bicay?
They unveiled their Liberty flying car back in 2018.
Okay.
And they said it was the first flying car in production as of March 2018.
So they beat everyone else to market.
Well, that's what they claimed.
Okay.
Now, the Liberty's a bit different. It's not a fixed-wing aircraft.
Okay.
It's actually a gyrocopter.
A gyrocopter. So it uses that free-spinning rotor for lift.
Yep. And it also leans like a three-wheel motorcycle on the road.
Huh. That's interesting.
It's got 2 seats and uses a gasoline engine.
Right.
And it can reach a top speed of 112 miles per hour, both on land and in the air.
Not bad.
Not that bad at all. And they were planning to start full production in India in 2021.
So they were going for a global market?
They were, but it's still unclear how successful they've been.
Yeah, it's one thing to announce production, but another to actually sell these things.
Exactly. Okay. Now, here's an interesting development.
Okay.
In April 2021, a place called the world's first consumer flying car showroom opened in Los Altos, California.
A flying car showroom. Wow.
Yeah, it was a big deal, but here's the catch.
Yeah.
At that time, there were still no certified flying cars in actual production.
So it was a showroom without any cars to show.
Pretty much, it was more about showcasing the potential and generating excitement.
Yeah, it seems like the hype is getting ahead of the reality.
It does. All right, now let's jump ahead to 2023.
Okay.
And we've got Doroni Aerospace.
Doroni Aerospace.
Yeah, they're an American company. And they announced that they had earned FAA airworthiness certification for their electric flying car.
Electric, so that's a big shift.
It is. A lot of companies are moving towards electric propulsion.
Yeah, it makes sense for environmental reasons.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what's special about Doroni's design?
What features 10 independent propulsion systems.
10? That's a lot.
It is. And they claim it can reach a top speed of 140 miles per hour.
Wow, that's fast.
And it has a range of 60 miles.
Okay, so the range is still limited.
Yeah, that's the challenge with electric aircraft right now.
Battery technology.
Exactly. But it's improving all the time.
So maybe that range will increase in the future.
Hopefully. Okay, last but not least,
All right.
the Aleph Model A.
The Aleph Model A.
Yeah, this one is pretty unique.
What's so special about it?
Well, it's a tilting biplane design.
A tilting biplane. I've never heard of that.
It's pretty unconventional. It basically has 2 sets of wings stacked on top of each other.
Okay.
And they can tilt to transition between vertical and horizontal flight.
Mm-hmm. That's a clever idea.
It is, and apparently it's attracted a lot of investment.
Really? Even though it was still in development?
Yeah, it seems like investors are willing to bet on these novel designs.
Yeah, I guess they see the potential for a big payoff.
Exactly. All right, so we've seen this incredible array of designs and companies.
It's a very active field.
It is. But now let's step back a bit and talk about some of the fundamental design considerations.
Okay, so what are the key challenges in creating a practical flying car?
Well, first and foremost, it's got to be safe.
Of course.
You're talking about a vehicle that operates in 2 very different environments.
Right, the road and the air.
Exactly. And those environments have very different safety requirements.
Yeah, you've got traffic laws and air traffic control and all sorts of things to consider.
Exactly. And right now, most designs still require a human pilot.
Okay.
But for flying cars to become truly mainstream,
Yeah,
they probably need to be more automated.
like self-flying.
Exactly. And they need to be environmentally friendly.
Yeah, we don't want to create a whole new source of pollution.
No. And of course, they need to be affordable.
Right, if they're too expensive, only the super rich will be able to afford them.
Exactly. So it's a lot to ask for.
It's like trying to solve multiple complex problems at the same time.
All right, so let's talk about some of the specific design challenges.
Okay.
First up, lift generation.
Lift generation. So how do you get the thing off the ground?
Exactly. And there are a few different approaches.
Yeah.
You've got fixed wings, which are the traditional airplane wings.
Right.
They're great for efficient flight, but they require a runway for takeoff and landing.
Yeah, that's a big limitation for a flying car.
It is, which is why a lot of designs incorporate folding wings.
Ah, so you can drive on the road with the wings tucked away.
Exactly. Then
Yeah.
you've got spinning rotors.
Like helicopters.
Exactly. And this is where we get into VTOL capability.
Vertical takeoff and landing.
Yep.
Okay.
So with rotors, you can take off and land vertically without needing a runway.
That's a huge advantage for a flying car.
It is. But rotors can be noisy and complex.
Yeah, and they can be dangerous if they're not properly shielded.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's direct powered lift.
Direct powered lift, what's that?
So this is where you use something like ducted fans or other types of vertical thrust systems.
Okay, so instead of spinning a big rotor,
Yeah.
you're using multiple smaller fans.
Exactly. And this can be a more compact and efficient way to achieve VTOL.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we've even seen some designs that use a combination of these methods.
Oh, really? Like a hybrid approach?
This is exactly, for example, the Aleph Model A that we talked about earlier.
The one with the tilting biplane?
Yeah, it uses a combination of tilting wings and ducted fans to achieve both vertical and horizontal flight.
Wow, that's pretty innovative.
It is. All right, now let's talk about power.
Okay.
Aircraft engines need to be very powerful for their size.
Yeah, they got to generate enough thrust to lift the vehicle off the ground.
Exactly. And that's a challenge when you're also trying to make the vehicle compact and lightweight.
Right, you don't want to add too much weight.
Nope. And then there's the question of how to efficiently divert power between the systems needed for road travel and the systems needed for flight.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Some designs use multiple engines.
One for the road and one for the air.
Exactly. But that adds complexity and weight.
Yeah, it does.